Greetings. Welcome to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagenow, and we are back here finally in the Hendrickson Library at the Center for the Preservation of Western Civilization. John Hendrickson and myself back here in studio today. John, did I get the intro right?
You did, yeah.
I did.
Well
Good.
done. Well
Good.
done. Yeah.
You know, we haven't talked about, there's been a lot of changes. The book of the week we haven't featured lately.
No, we haven't. Yeah.
But there is, people think we're joking about the
Yeah.
Hendrickson. What is
Yeah.
the book of the week right now at the Hendrickson Library? I don't even know. I didn't even look.
Yeah, it's the How the Progressives Rewrote the Constitution by Richard Epstein.
Okay. So you want to give us not even the Cliff Notes, give us the John's Notes on that?
Yeah,
or-
yeah. Well, it's just a short book on constitutional history about how the progressive movement of the early 20th century, in a sense, how the people like Woodrow Wilson and FDR and political movement that was basically through Supreme Court decisions and other political forums took us from a constitutional limited government to almost like a big government that we have today.
Almost?
Yes, yeah.
Almost?
Yes, yeah.
What are you talking about?
Yeah.
What is this almost?
Yeah. So if you want to understand why we have the government we have today, that's a good book to read.
Well,
because there was especially what they call the revolution of 1937, when Roosevelt was FDR was able to remake the Supreme Court, and the court basically started to rubber stamp all these New Deal laws, which created a lot of precedent as well in constitutional law. That changed. They had a tremendous it still has an impact on our government. So,
well, good.
Yeah.
Well, folks can check that out.
and just one quick point on that, because the progressives, they said the Constitution was a living document. They said it was, living, breathing document. It changes with the times. It's Darwinian, and evolves, and so they said limited government of the founding fathers was outdated, and so therefore, those principles couldn't exist anymore.
Well, yes, and I think if I learned, one of the few things I actually learned in law school was that for the left, the ends justify the means and how they get there on this. So the Constitution is often just an obstacle to be overcome on their way to getting things done. So anyway, okay, well, we've got a couple of big things we need to cover today, John, and it's been a while, and I have to take full responsibility for the fact that we did not have an episode last week. And maybe you can still hear it. My voice is trashed. It was bad last week. John just laughed at me, just openly mocked me all week here in the office for how gravelly I thought it sounded cool, but John said no, it sounded awful. But hopefully our listeners get all of our emails and our social media and saw that last week we released the latest installment of the ITR Foundation poll. And some really interesting things in this poll and some things that were, frankly, not that interesting because they were kind of the same things we'd seen before. And I know that our listeners love it, John, when we go through line by line in every single number and crosstab. But we don't have time for that today.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. So I want to hit the highlights because I think I'm going to start with my big takeaway. I want to get your take, whether you agree with us or not. The broader electorate, horse race kinds of stuff, is mostly unchanged from where it was at the election. If anything, so still a very red state. But what we've seen is the fiscal issues, the tax issues, are even more important, even more popular than they were the last time we tested this. That's my biggest takeaway from all this. What's your take on that?
I agree with that. I think some of the results show that. Certainly when we looked at, what issues are concerning to Iowans, and those were some of the top polling ones, and some of the tax issues, some of the specific tax issues we asked, just the responses demonstrate that these are issues that are front and center on the minds of Iowans right now. That's
right. I mean, we ask a lot of questions. We didn't actually get into a lot of the horse race kinds of stuff this time, who's going to beat who, because it is a long ways until the election. But we did ask these specific questions. Just as an aside, the generic ballot, would you vote for a Republican, for a Democrat? We think that's a relevant question. It's still +8 Republican, which, could change, but we still looks like folks in Iowa generally want to support Republicans. But we asked, what is your top priority? And we had asked this in the fall leading into the election, and inflation in the economy was number one, and number one by a long ways, and still is. But a couple of things that were really interesting to me is how much some of these fell off. Actually, illegal immigration at the border was not as big an issue this time. Fell off, and abortion was not as big an issue this time. You know what I think a lot of that is, and I'm not going to dig into these crosstabs. I think that because President Trump was elected, I think people stopped worrying about it as much.
Yes, yeah.
That, and maybe not so much on abortion, but on illegal immigration, they're like, okay, well, we know Trump's going to take care of it, or at least address it. I don't know.
I think that's a good assumption.
But taxes and government spending actually kind of popped up. Going into the election, just about 9% of Iowans said taxes and government spending was a big deal to them. That's up to 16%. So those drop off in other categories went over onto taxes and government spending. I think it's safe to say that about half of these issues, if you add them all up, amount to cost of government to Iowa voters. Size and scope of government, tax burden, that inflate, all those things that government has control of our lives over. At least half of Iowans would say that's the number one issue. And we don't just do that because we're Iowans for tax relief. I mean, this is a fair poll.
Yes, yeah, yep.
One thing that was really interesting to me, we tested the popularity of or approval rating of Doge.
Yeah.
And actually, the governor's Doge committee did significantly better than President Trump and Elon Musk's.
I was
that
surprised
surprised
by
me.
that. Yes, yeah.
Because all the attention that Elon Musk is getting and all of the awful things that have been uncovered at the federal level. But Iowans are really excited about what Governor Reynolds has done. And interestingly, I don't know if you've seen this. She had a kind of a good graphic out. Like, she's been doing Doge for a few years now.
Yes, yeah.
This isn't anything new of going in and rooting out a
Yeah.
lot of this government spending. But, half of Iowans support the governor's Doge. Okay, the main thing, though, is these tax issues. And this is what I do want to spend a little bit of time on, John. So there are three things that we tested, and these are the same three things that we tested last fall. And because I think they're the three main issues in front of the legislature. First is the proposed constitutional amendment that you have to have a 2/3 majority vote in the legislature anytime you raise taxes. That's the first one. That's in the Constitution. Second one is to protect the flat tax in the Constitution. And then the third one is would you support or oppose a 2% hard spending cap on local government spending, meaning they can only grow their spending 2% a year, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And we know that's relevant because we're going to talk about
That's
that
right,
here in a little bit,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Okay.
yep.
So we tested those three things. And again, it is striking how popular these ideas are to me. The first one is the supermajority to raise taxes, which was, again, roughly unchanged from last fall, but over 66% of Iowans support that constitutional amendment. And we're going to see this again later, over half of Democrats, it cuts across the partisan spectrum, support that restriction on the legislature's ability to raise taxes. Thoughts on that?
I'm not surprised because it's a non-controversial issue, except for a lot of special interests who oppose it. But a 2/3 majority requirement is there's a lot of states that have that, both red, what we consider red conservative Republican states, as well as some progressive blue states that have those that have that supermajority requirement. So this is I would say just it's a common sense taxpayer protection, and it should be hard to raise taxes, and this would just force legislators to build a consensus if they want to raise taxes.
I think that's important. Now, they're very close to be able to do that without minority party support with the current breakdown. But historically, the majorities that they have right now are an anomaly, and they would require bipartisan support. Normally, I'm not necessarily in favor of giving power to the minority because that's what elections are for. However, when it is to benefit the taxpayer, to make it, like you said, anything that makes it harder, that's just one more tool that the taxpayer has. The flat tax, John, did better than it did last fall. It's still not quite as popular as the others, but that doesn't faze me really. The flat tax takes a little bit more to get your mind around.
Yeah.
I think the average voter doesn't necessarily. I don't know.
Well, it's still a new idea because it just really kicked in January, so it's
right.
Iowans aren't used to it, and basically since the income tax, we've had a progressive income tax system. So I think as they see the advantages of having a low flat tax, I think Iowans will see why it's important and see the benefits of it as they get to keep more of their income. And also one of the reasons why it's important to have that constitutional protection is that it could be easy for a future legislature, one, to go back to a progressive tax system, which would mean higher rates, or to create a wealth tax, which some states have been trying to do.
That's the one I think that you would see.
Yeah.
Call it a millionaire tax.
Yeah.
Call it
Yeah.
something to try and get at the highest earners. And look, that's baked into their rhetoric now. Anytime we talk about income tax reductions, it's always that the folks that pay a lot of tax are getting a big part of the benefit. But this is still really popular. And we'll call this a plurality at 46% support, but only 25% of Iowans say no on that. I think a lot of folks, the cynic in me says, I'm not sure that people understand how that actually benefits them directly. Well, if it's a flat tax, do I win or lose if they go away from that, right?
Yeah,
Maybe they're just going to cut my taxes and leave everybody else the same.
Yeah.
So, but it's still a very popular idea. Then finally, and this is the one where we're going to talk about this for a minute, and then we got to move on to talk about property taxes. But this idea of a 2% spending cap on property taxes, and we've been talking about this since last fall. We tested it last fall. And again, 2/3 of Iowans support this 2/3 hard cap. Only 14% of Iowans do not. Again, over 50% of Democrats even support this. Iowans are very frustrated with their property taxes and are going to support, across the political spectrum, support capping it.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think the big thing, one is you can look at it, whether it's any of these three, is that this is how popular this is among Republicans, Independents, Democrats. And I would point out for our listeners who are in the legislature or working inside the legislature, how often do you find an issue that is at least a 2/3 majority issue with hard data to support it, that that you can take back out onto the campaign trail, go to Iowans on their front doorstep and say, I did that for you? That's got to be a very attractive thing for the legislature. Ask me how I know. But
yes.
But so, your thoughts on that? These are big numbers.
It is.
This
yeah,
isn't
yeah.
just some piece of the conservative agenda that may or may not actually help you in your next election or whatever it is. These are hard numbers.
Absolutely. It's clear. It's bipartisan. It's Republican, Democrat, Independent. It surpasses the urban-rural divide, and so it's clear that Iowans want something done on property taxes, and they believe that this is a common sense solution to cap the collections of local government. And you and I have talked about this quite a bit, and this is what, in a sense, the state has done in lowering income tax rates, is just slow the growth of spending. And that's all we're asking them to do. We're not asking them to basically make drastic cuts to their spending. and it's just you're asking them to slow the growth so they can provide property tax relief to their residents.
Yeah.
And that's what this does.
Well, and we talked about that this morning, John, that despite we've seen, and I will concede that the Des Moines suburbs operate a little bit differently, high growth areas, things work a little different here. But they're continuing to add staff, add headcount. They're and they need to in many of these cases, but we're just this is supposed to be a reasonable effort to slow the growth down. So the big takeaway from the poll, Iowans' most important issue are the things that government does that controls their cost of living. They're concerned about that. And I'm not going to sit here and bang on the price of a dozen eggs. That operates differently.
Mm-hmm.
But people are very attuned to what things cost. How much am I paying in taxes? What's my income tax burden? How is inflation costing me? So you got to see those things hand in hand. Not only are these tax questions supported, but they are supported inside of Iowans' number one issue. Those are the kinds of issues that actually impact how people vote. You could get 99% of the people to say that they support, I don't know, getting rid of daylight savings time. I'm sure that's a popular concept, but it ain't going to change how anybody votes next fall.
Yeah.
This will change how people vote. This is the thing that people are talking about.
That's right.
So, again, encouragement to our legislators to continue to look for solutions in this, which is the segue here, John, to what we have spent, I think, the last 2 to 3 days working on here.
Yeah.
Which is the property tax bill that has been released by Senator Ways and Means Chairman, Senator Dan Dawson, and Ways and Means Chair in the House, Representative Bobby Kaufmann. There's a lot here.
Yes, yeah.
And I don't think we should try to dive into all of it because I'm going to get lost in that. You'll understand it all. I will get lost. And if I get lost, the listeners are going to get lost. And then we're all lost and the wheels are just going to come off. But I do want to kind of talk about what it is they're trying to do. Because even in their own words, they say we're continuing to work on this, right?
Yes, yeah.
I'll frame it up. They said at the outset, I think in their press conference that they held, that this is the biggest or widest ranging, however they framed that up, property tax bill in decades.
Yes, yeah.
I don't read the exact
70
quote.
years or something. Yeah.
I only have a good 20 years of perspective on that, but I think it's probably right. If for no other reason that this really does completely change at a minimum how we do property taxes. So there's 2 or 3 main operations in this bill. What does it do?
Yeah, so the big things that it does is it does establish a 2% property tax cap on cities and counties, and so this would be on the main levies, and it does allow for new growth, and so it defines new growth in there, and then it also applies that 2% cap to the other capped levies. But then there's also the uncapped levies are outside of that growth. So not everything falls within that 2% cap. The other big thing is the school property tax levy. And of course, the schools are the big, probably largest driver of property tax bills. And what happens there is there's a buy down that will occur where that goes from and this is gradual. It doesn't happen overnight, but that 540 levy goes to, I believe, 297. But what that does is they'll be shifted. The state will take over, buy that down through a period of years, and then there will be some funds, some property tax relief funds that'll be gradually phased out and to pay for that, and then another big item of that. Of course, will be the phase out of rollback, and this is a big change for how they do assessments. And so basically, the ag tile will be gone, and properties will be assessed at 100% market value, and so that will be a big change in how they do that. And so another factor that will be coming in, that's a big part of this bill, is that the homestead credit will be eliminated and replaced with a homestead exemption. And so there is an assumption now, and of course we're still looking into this, so there's an assumption that the combination of the 2% levy cap and the homestead exemption will provide in a sense, kind of a property tax protection that will cushion where the rollback did. And then also there's a mechanism within there that, lack of a better word, kind of what we call revenue neutral, where as valuations go up, rates go down. It's sort of similar to what Utah has within their property tax system. And then there's some other reforms that are made to some other property tax credits, like the military exemptions and credits, and for seniors and things like that. So, but those are the main highlights.
So the two big things here, if I'm going to oversimplify it, because that's what I do, there is a 2% revenue cap on some, if not most, of what local governments can tax. So a 2% cap. If there's things that operate outside of that, like a debt levy or a municipal police and fire, whatever. So some of those things, maybe they should be outside of it, whatever. But for those, most of the controllable things that were not voter approved, they're going to be capped at 2%. Then there's this whole concept of, as folks probably know, school funding in Iowa is a combination of state dollars and local dollars, local property tax dollars. And there's a formula inside of that. And what this would do is draw down how much how much is paid for by property tax, at least on the levy, and then, but that is replaced with some of these other credits and pieces that are in the technical portions of the bill. So anyway, it's not supposed to, as I understand it, cost this. And I tax cuts don't cost money. It's not supposed to be a revenue reduction for the state of Iowa. For the state general fund should not be devoting resources. That is not their goal. We think that's important. So I think the questions that we have on this, and we're going to really try and look at this, are specific examples. So if you take a 2% revenue cap, what does that actually mean to a city or a county? I think there are some places, even with growth, in Waukee, for example, or Ankeny, if they get the growth, it may not actually restrict them very much. Yeah, maybe rightfully so. A rapidly growing community has certain things they need to build a new fire station, need to put new policemen on the roads, or whatever that is. And so we're going to look at specific examples of how this may actually help or hurt or whatever. And then, which should always be our focus, John, not what does it do to government, what does it do to the individual Iowan?
That's right, yeah.
Because that's really what we're about here. What will this bill do to my or your property taxes in a year? And we're gonna hopefully work on and hopefully work with the legislature on what maybe some of that modeling might look at. And it's rough. It's hard to say.
Yes, yeah.
But what does a 2% spending limit mean, not just in Waukee, but in any place? What does that mean in Cedar Rapids? What does it mean in Dubuque or Atlantic?
Yeah.
And figure that out, because that's really where it matters. This wide-ranging bill, which I think actually looks promising, at least in its concept. But once you actually, because we hear over and over from Iowans, John, it's complicated. They want to go and talk to their local city council, but they can't compete with the finance manager on how the whole budget goes together.
That's right.
And so let's work on finding out to try and decode what's on this bill. This bill is, 200 pages long, you said?
It's 50 50 some.
Okay, I misread that, but still, it's lengthy, it's complicated, a whole bunch of other code references. So that's part of the work. One is understanding what's actually on the pages, and two, what's that going to mean for individual Iowans, for property taxpayers, and for cities and counties. And schools should come out about even on that because they're still going to get the same amount of money. Mm-hmm. It's just how that formula is calculated to get there. Is that a fair statement?
It is, yeah, yeah. And from what I understand, it would equalize more of the funding for education. I mean, that's what their goal is with that. If that.
When you hear the word equalize, somebody's winning and somebody's losing.
That's right.
Okay? No, and I mean, maybe that's fair.
Yeah.
Because it goes back to the whole idea of property-rich districts, property-poor districts. If you live in a property-poor district, you're having to pay more in property taxes to fund the schools, and you're probably taking more in state dollars in order to fill up the formula because ultimately each student gets the same amount in Iowa regardless. For example, if you live in Okoboji, you don't it's kicking off so much property tax there because the value of homes, there's almost no state aid to it up there. So, they're going to come out different in whatever this formula is as we equalize than someplace in a property poorer district in some of our rural areas that may just not have the tax base. So I think that's a good effort. We'll just see if some of those differences come to light as we move through this. Well, good. Look, I think we've talked about this a lot, John, but our listeners haven't heard us talk about this. I think we want to like this. I think this looks like a lot of the things that we've talked about. I didn't necessarily, the idea of getting rid of rollback, but changing the levy rates. We more or less looks like the same mechanism that we talked about, 2%, just done a little bit different.
Yeah.
So that looks good, and we're going to figure out some of the school funding stuff and go forward. But it's complicated. Hopefully, we can provide at least some clarity on what some of these things mean. But full credit to Senator Dawson, Representative Kaufmann, because this is a lot of hard work that has gone into this.
Yeah,
to try and do
this.
This.
Bill.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
It really is. And that's not the only things that those guys are working on right now.
That's right.
And there's a lot of stuff out there, including fixing the property tax notification statements. That's out there too, John.
Yeah.
And there's a Ways and Means bill.
Yes.
I don't know if there's one in the Senate. I know there's one in the House.
House. In fact, I just referenced that House Study Bill 228.
Okay.
Yeah, is dealing with the property tax statements.
Because those are starting to go out, and they haven't changed from last year. They're still pretty tough to decipher.
Yeah.
So we'll get there.
And that's a needed reform.
All right. Anything else you want to add on the property tax bill, John?
No, I just, we are continuing to. I talked to someone just over the lunch hour who I wanted to talk about that. One of our members, and so there's interest from Iowans about it, and so there's people that are paying attention. So
okay, we talked for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Here's the main thing. Iowans want controls, limits, restrictions on their taxes.
Yeah.
And we've got a major bill in the legislature that attempts to do that. I think these guys are probably onto something politically.
Yes.
Would you agree with me?
Absolutely.
All right, great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think that'll do it. That's all the time we got for today. Thank you, John. Thank you for joining us, folks. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to tell your friends. And with that, we will see you next time on ITR Live.